Welcome. You found your way here at just the right time. Maybe the world outside is a little too loud right now, or perhaps your mind is full of unfinished thoughts, ideas, or just the steady hum of a long day. But here, in this quiet space, you're invited to slow down, to listen, to breathe, and to wander back in time. Tonight, we travel to ancient Greece. Not to the sparkling temples of Athens or the rich markets of Corinth, but to a place both feared and admired by its neighbors. A place carved by discipline and forged in silence. Sparta. But this isn't the story of great Spartan kings or legendary battles. No, tonight we explore a different angle. Quieter, more human. Imagine yourself as a child, no more than 7 years old, standing at the threshold of a life that few in history have ever lived. This is the world of the Spartan boy. A life of simplicity, of routine, and of unyielding discipline. But it is also a world of tradition, of shared identity, and a rhythm that pulses beneath the surface, steady, ancient, and unchanging. As you close your eyes and allow your thoughts to drift, let the sights and sounds of another time carry you. We won't rush. There is no hurry here. Just a slow walk through the distant past, where every detail unfolds like a soft whisper. So settle in. Let the room be still, and imagine yourself stepping barefoot onto the cool, dusty ground of ancient Sparta. The air is cool just before dawn. There's a faint scent of olive trees in the wind, mingled with the distant hint of smoke from the few cooking fires allowed this early in the Spartan countryside. It's still dark outside, but movement begins nonetheless. In Sparta, time waits for no one, certainly not for boys. You are 7 years old. Your tunic is rough against your skin, woven from coarse wool, undyed, unadorned. It's the only garment you own. No shoes, no cloak. Barefoot, you step onto the stone floor of the dormitory where you and a dozen other boys sleep side by side on straw mats. You've been here for a few weeks now, though time has already started to lose meaning. This is the agoge, a rigorous public education system that every Spartan boy must pass through. It is your new home. Your new world. And it's not a place for comfort. There is no morning bell. No one calls out to wake you. Instead, you rise from instinct, or from the subtle movement of the older boy beside you shifting his weight. The dormitory smells faintly of sweat, straw, and stone, an earthy combination you've come to associate with sleep. Outside, the light is pale blue. The sun has not yet risen, but already the outlines of the training yard are visible. The dirt ground, packed firm from countless feet, stretches out like a dry canvas. A wooden post leans slightly to one side, used for balance drills and striking practice. Along the perimeter, flat stones serve as makeshift seats, though you're rarely allowed to sit. Your morning begins not with breakfast, for Spartan boys do not eat upon waking. Instead, your first task is movement, controlled, repetitive, and unhurried. A senior boy, perhaps 14, barks a short command. You join the others in a line and begin a series of physical drills. Marching in place. Lunges. Running in circles. The purpose isn't speed. It's precision. Endurance. Control. You're not praised for trying hard. You're not encouraged with kind words. Instead, you're expected to meet the standard, and if you don't, correction is swift and silent. A slap. A shove. A stern look from a watching elder. By the time the sun peaks over the low hills to the east, your body is already sore. But there is a strange comfort in the rhythm. The repetition dulls your thoughts. The routine becomes a kind of music, an unchanging tempo that rocks you gently from one moment to the next. Now it is time for lessons, not in reading or numbers, but in discipline and obedience. The older boys are role models, not teachers. You watch how they stand, how they speak in brief, clipped tones. You are expected to speak little, and when you do, your words must be clear, respectful, and direct. Wit is admired. Whining is not. There is a short pause, an unexpected one. A small boy has been caught stealing bread from a communal storehouse. But this is no crime in the agoge. In fact, stealing is expected, so long as you do not get caught. The boy is punished not for the theft, but for his failure, his clumsiness, his lack of subtlety. You watch without comment. This, too, is part of your education. Eventually, there is food, but very little. A small bowl of broth, perhaps a crust of barley bread. Hunger is a constant companion here, but also a teacher. It sharpens the mind. It disciplines the body. At least, that is what you are told. The midday sun is high now, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard. You are told to lie flat on your stomach in the dust and hold your body still. A test of will. The ground is warm, almost hot, and tiny stones press into your skin. A fly lands on your cheek. You don't flinch. From time to time, a visiting elder, perhaps a veteran of war or a respected citizen, comes to observe. He may ask questions. He may set challenges. One such visitor today asks each boy to speak of honor. You are small, and your voice barely carries, but you speak clearly. Honor is not falling behind. Not crying. Not stopping. He says nothing, but moves on. You do not know if that is good or bad. Later, you are taken in groups of 2 or 3 to practice wrestling. The arena is dry and hard-packed. There is no soft sand, no protective mat. Your opponent is older than you. Larger. You struggle to keep your footing. Each throw lands with a thud, kicking up small clouds of dust. When it is over, you are bruised and tired, but strangely proud. You are learning. Slowly. Quietly. As dusk approaches, the light softens. The shadows stretch. The air cools again, and with it comes a rare moment of quiet. The boys are allowed to sit in a circle and speak, though only one at a time. A senior boy recites a story from memory about King Leonidas, the 300, and the narrow pass of Thermopylae. You've heard it before, but you listen again. The story is sacred here. A kind of lullaby in its own right. As the stars blink into view and the moon rises, you return to the dormitory. Your body aches, but you do not cry. You lie on your mat, the same scratchy wool tunic clinging to your skin. The night is quiet, save for the slow breathing of the boys around you. No songs. No bedtime stories. Just the memory of drills, dust, and duty. And yet, in the stillness, you begin to understand the rhythm. The purpose. The way a boy becomes something else. Not just a child. Not yet a soldier. But something in between. Something. Spartan. The stars still hang in the night sky as the boy leaves the village. There is no ceremony. No farewell. No songs or blessings. He walks silently, barefoot as always, with a small satchel of barley cakes tied at his side. The ground is cold beneath him, but the discomfort is familiar, almost welcome. At 14 years old, he has completed the early phase of the agoge, and now he is tasked with a final trial. He is not given a name in the records. He is simply a boy. One of many. One among hundreds who pass through the system, most unnamed, their memories stored only in the collective rhythm of Spartan life. but through whispered references in ancient texts and the observations of curious outsiders, his story has survived, dim and half-buried like a footprint in dry dust. This part of the agoge is known as the krupteia, the hidden or secret training. It is a test of endurance, silence, and something darker. It is said that boys were sent out into the wild, often alone, sometimes in pairs, to survive on their own. No shelter. No fire. No open signs of existence. They were not to be seen. If discovered, they failed. Imagine him walking through the olive groves just outside the village boundary. The world around him is dark, but not empty. The moonlight filters softly through the trees, turning each leaf silver. The air carries the scent of resin and crushed grass. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls. He pauses, listening, not with fear, but with discipline. He has been trained for this. Every breath, every step, every twitch of the ear is part of his quiet armor. He carries a small knife, its handle worn from the hands of those who held it before. It is not for fighting. It is for survival. He uses it to cut branches, peel bark, scrape moss from stones, and, when needed, to skin the small animals he catches with simple snares made from thin twine and bent branches. The days pass slowly. He eats what little he can find. A handful of nuts. The occasional lizard. Wild onions dug from sandy soil. He does not complain. He does not speak. He is not expected to feel comfort. The krupteia, according to ancient accounts, had another purpose as well, one shrouded in moral ambiguity. In some versions of the story, the boys were tasked with observing, and even punishing, helots, the enslaved agricultural workers of Spartan society. This part of the ritual is never described in detail by Spartan sources, but it appears in the words of others, outsiders who watched the city with a mixture of awe and unease. Did our unnamed boy encounter this part of the test? Was he ordered to act, to assert power, to learn control through fear? Or was his version of the krupteia purely one of silence and isolation? We do not know. The records do not say. And perhaps that is fitting. What we do know is that not all boys returned. Some disappeared into the hills, their bodies never found. Others were taken by illness or accident, bitten by snakes, felled by infection, or starved when their traps failed. Still others returned, quiet and changed. Their faces thinner. Their eyes deeper. Their voices no longer boyish. Our boy did not return. His absence was not marked by mourning. Spartan society did not grieve in the way we might expect. There were no weeping mothers. No monuments. No carved stones bearing his name. Instead, his fate became part of the agoge itself, a cautionary silence. A reminder whispered between boys during the long, dusty drills, be better than the one who did not come back. In time, his space in the dormitory was filled. Another child, perhaps 8 or 9, took up his straw mat and carried on the rhythm of Spartan life. The missing boy became less a person and more a pattern, one thread woven into a larger fabric of discipline, sacrifice, and the relentless forging of identity. Centuries later, his story survives only as a faint outline. A shadow drawn in words by the philosopher Plutarch. A curious detail noted by Aristotle. A flicker of memory in a culture that prized the collective above the individual. And yet, if you pause, if you allow your mind to settle into the quiet hum of the past, you might still feel him. Out there in the dark hills. Moving quietly. Breathing slowly. Eyes fixed on something far beyond the reach of home. In this way, the boy who never returned continues to walk. Not as a ghost. Not as a hero. but as a soft echo of a system so powerful, so unwavering, that even the loss of a child became part of its rhythm. Now, as you drift quietly with this thought, imagine the stillness again. The cool night. The lonely path. And a child, barefoot and silent, passing like a breeze through the ancient stones. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the Spartan landscape as it exists today. The sun sets slowly over the Peloponnesian hills, casting long shadows across broken walls and quiet fields. The ruins of ancient Sparta lie scattered across the valley floor, softened by time. The tall reeds of the Eurotas River sway in the evening wind, brushing gently against stones that once marked the heart of one of the most enigmatic societies in history. And yet, as archaeologists have long noted, Sparta does not rise from the earth the way other ancient cities do. There are no towering columns like those in Athens. No grand theatres carved into cliffs. No sprawling palaces of glittering frescoes like those found in Mycenae. In fact, for many centuries, visitors expressed surprise at how ordinary it all seemed. This was not an accident. Sparta's identity was built not on display, but on restraint. Its people believed in what they called austerity, a deliberate rejection of luxury, grandeur, and external excess. Even in death, Spartans left little behind. They did not bury their children with golden toys or ornate inscriptions. Their gravestones were simple, or altogether absent. Their buildings plain. Their lives largely unwritten. And so, historians and archaeologists must look for other kinds of evidence, small clues, faint impressions, and the careful words of those who observed from outside. Imagine yourself now as an archaeologist, standing beneath the soft light of the Mediterranean sky. You kneel beside a dusty trench, brushing gently at the edge of a clay tile. Your fingertips work carefully, slowly, revealing the corner of what might once have been a communal bathhouse or training yard. Perhaps this was a place where young boys once bathed after long hours in the agoge, though there is no inscription to say so. No child's name carved into the surface. Only the faint layout of walls and worn flooring. Elsewhere, fragments of lead tokens have been discovered, possibly used in Spartan education or ritual. Their purpose is still debated. Were they game pieces? Tally markers? Objects of reward or discipline? No one knows for sure. Like so much of Spartan childhood, they raise more questions than answers. And then, there are the bones. In certain excavation sites, skeletal remains of young males, boys aged between 7 and 16, have been uncovered, buried alone, without offerings. The condition of these remains varies. Some show signs of malnutrition, others of healed injuries. While not conclusive, they suggest a pattern consistent with the historical accounts of harsh upbringing and physical trials. Still, the bones cannot speak. They cannot tell us whether the boys suffered, or whether they felt pride. Whether they feared the Krypteia, or longed for it. Most of what we know about the Spartan education system comes not from Spartans themselves, but from Athenians, Romans, and later philosophers and historians who observed Sparta with fascination, envy, and at times, unease. Plato praised the discipline of the agoge, yet hinted at its severity. Aristotle was more critical, calling it a system that focused too much on producing warriors and too little on cultivating wisdom. Xenophon, a soldier, an admirer of Spartan customs, offered the most detailed descriptions of the agoge, but even his accounts were shaped by admiration rather than direct experience. So what, then, do we truly know? We know that the agoge was more than physical training. It was a social machine designed to mold boys into citizens, men who belonged to the collective above all else. Boys were taught to endure pain, control emotion, speak concisely, and observe hierarchy. Even their humor was shaped by expectation. A Spartan boy's joke had to be brief, sharp, and biting. Wit was praised, verbosity was not. They were not raised by their families, but by the state. Mothers weaned them, fathers stood aside, and after age 7, the community became both parent and judge. But we also know that no two boys experienced it exactly the same. Some thrived. Others faded quietly into the background. And some, like the unnamed boy from the last segment, vanished altogether. One particularly haunting mystery surrounds the Platanistas, a strange ritual sport played on an island in the Eurotas River. Ancient sources describe 2 teams of boys, stripped nearly bare, engaging in a kind of chaotic mock battle using fists, hands, and even stones. The goal was to drive the other team into the water, or simply to endure. There were no referees. Only older boys watching, judging. Injuries were common. There were even rumors, uncertain and unconfirmed, of deaths. Yet this event was celebratory, part of a festival honoring Artemis Orthia, the goddess of youth and discipline. On certain holy days, boys were whipped at her altar, their cries ignored by the watching crowd. This was not seen as cruelty, it was sacred. A test of will, of obedience, of becoming more than a child. Today, the altar of Artemis Orthia still stands, in fragments, its stones worn by time and silence. Tourists walk past it unaware of what once took place. Children laugh nearby, their sandals slapping against pavement. The modern city of Sparta, built over the ruins, buzzes with life, electricity, and the gentle chaos of the present. But beneath that surface, the old rhythm still lingers. The stories echo faintly in the broken tiles. The footsteps of boys long gone still seem to move through the olive groves at dusk. If you listen closely, with the soft ears of sleep, you might just hear them, the rustle of bare feet, the brief murmur of a forgotten language, the sharp breath of a child trying not to cry. So many details have vanished. The records lost. The rituals faded. And yet, something remains. Not in monuments. Not in treasures. But in the way we still whisper about them. In the mystery of a childhood that left so few traces, and yet lingers, impossibly, in the stones. And now, gently, we drift again. Away from the trenches and broken pillars. Away from the olive trees and temple altars. Let us walk, slowly, into another part of Spartan life, one that stood in contrast to the dusty yards of training boys. A world of robes, of whispered counsel, and of elite rule. Let the dust settle now. We leave behind the aching limbs of the training yard, the whispered warnings of the Krupteia, and the fragments of lost childhood. In their place, a different rhythm begins. Slower. Firmer. Shaped not by the fragile steps of youth, but by the measured weight of power. Now, you are no longer a boy. Imagine yourself some years older, perhaps 21 or 22. Your body is lean, your movements economical, your voice rarely raised. You have passed the trials. You have endured the silence. You have eaten hunger and swallowed pain. And now, at last, you begin the long ascent into adulthood, into status, into the hidden world of Sparta's elite. But even here, your path is still shaped by the echoes of the agoge. Spartan society was unlike any other in the Greek world. It was a closed world, small, secretive, and rigidly ordered. Its citizens were divided into layers, at the top, the spartiates. Full citizens, male, born of 2 Spartan parents, raised through the agoge, and entrusted with the defense and governance of the state. Below them, the perioikoi, free but non-citizen dwellers of surrounding towns. And at the bottom, the helots, enslaved agricultural laborers, bound to the land and the needs of the state. But even among Spartiates, not all were equal. The ruling class, the elite of the elite, was shaped not only by birth, but by behavior. Every gesture, every word, every silence was part of a lifelong performance. The boy who had once lain in the dust at dawn now stood in a quiet hall of polished stone, robes folded over one shoulder, listening more than speaking. Spartan leaders were not chosen for their wealth or charm, but for their restraint, discipline, and quiet strength. These were men who had learned, from the age of 7, how to endure without complaint, how to follow before they led, and how to carry the weight of the collective on shoulders hardened by repetition. At the pinnacle of this hierarchy stood 2 kings, yes, 2. Unlike most Greek states, Sparta had a dual kingship, descended from 2 legendary brothers, Eurysthenes and Procles. Their descendants ruled in parallel, one drawn from each royal line. These kings were not flamboyant rulers. They were priests, generals, and figureheads, bound by law and watched by councils. They did not live in palaces, nor did they dine in extravagance. Even their clothing was simple. Their words, few. And so, if you were one of them, or on the path to becoming like them, your life was not easier than that of your peers. It was harder in a different way. You were watched constantly, expected to speak with weight and act with precision. Your time was not your own. You rose early. Always early. Not to train, but to deliberate. The Gerousia, the Council of Elders, met regularly to guide Spartan policy. Most of its members were over 60. Men who had long since passed from youthful strength into the colder clarity of old age. They carried with them decades of silence and judgment. You sat among them, listening, learning, occasionally asked to speak. Meals were taken in common dining halls known as syssitia. Even the elite did not eat in private. Each night, groups of men gathered, seated by age and status, consuming modest meals, barley broth, pork boiled in blood, figs, and olives. Wine was served, but never in excess. Conversations were sharp, often philosophical. Laughter was rare, but never forbidden. This practice, too, was a direct echo of childhood. Spartan boys were introduced to syssitia as teens, invited to observe before they could speak. By adulthood, the ritual was ingrained. It reinforced equality, discipline, and accountability. And yet, for all the emphasis on humility, there were subtle privileges. As a member of the elite, you were entrusted with decisions, military, legal, and social. You helped guide how many boys would be admitted to the agoge each year. You sat in judgment when one failed or faltered. You advised the ephors, Sparta's 5 elected overseers, on foreign affairs. And if war loomed, it was you who rode at the front. Even the elite were expected to fight. There was no lounging in marble courts, no reclining at poetry readings as in Athens. In Sparta, status did not excuse you from labor, it intensified your obligations. And yet, some quiet comforts existed. A private corner in a shared home. A cloak of deeper red. A trusted place near the hearth during winter. Your weapons were better balanced. Your sandals repaired more quickly. Your voice carried weight. But even as you moved through the world of power, childhood never quite left you. Every scar you bore came from that training yard. Every silence you maintained was born in the hush of the dormitory. Every judgment you passed on others carried the quiet memory of your own trials. And so, the Spartan elite was not a class apart, it was a class forged from the same fire, shaped by the same tools, but cooled more slowly. Hardened not only by blows and hunger, but by observation and control. No one laughed too loudly. No one wept in public. Even in victory, celebration was brief, subdued, and practical. And when the day was done, when the deliberations were finished, and the dining hall swept clean, you returned to your bed, simple, unadorned, familiar. You lay down, not to dream, but to rest briefly. For in Sparta, the body may rest, but the mind does not wander far. There is always another morning, another decision, another quiet test. Let your breathing slow with that thought. From boy to ruler, the rhythm continues, measured, unbroken, deeply ingrained. The same discipline that raised children in silence now governs a city in shadows. Let us pause here. In the next segment, we will return to the beginning, gently revisiting the lives of Spartan mothers and fathers, and how the echo of childhood shaped the entire society around it. Let us shift, now, away from the dormitories and training fields, and into the hush of a Spartan home. Imagine a quiet stone house in the heart of the city, not grand, not ornamented, but solid. Its walls are thick, its door low and square, its floor swept clean each morning with a broom made of bundled twigs. The sun has just begun to rise beyond the distant mountains, casting a golden pink wash across the rooftops. There is no sound of livestock, no market vendors shouting in the square. Just the soft tapping of feet on stone and the slow creak of wooden shutters opening to the day. Inside, a woman kneels beside a shallow basin. Her hands are rough, hardened not by neglect but by strength. She is tall, broad-shouldered, her hair tied back with a strip of linen. She dips a cloth into cool water, wrings it carefully, and begins wiping down the stone threshold. This is not an idle chore. It is a ritual of care, quiet, unspoken, repeated each morning like a prayer. She is a Spartan mother. And though her son no longer lives here, taken, as all boys are, at the age of 7, his absence is not unfamiliar. In fact, it is expected. The life of a Spartan woman was unlike that of nearly any other in the ancient Greek world. In Athens, women lived largely behind closed doors. They were expected to speak little, appear seldom, and concern themselves with weaving and children. But in Sparta, the rhythm was different. Here, women held land, ran households, and commanded respect. They were not sheltered. They were not silent. They were guardians, not only of the home, but of tradition, pride, and expectation. She rises now, wiping her hands on her tunic. The cloth is dyed faintly red, the edges faded from many washes. A jug of water sits on a low wooden table. She drinks, sparingly, then lifts the jug with practiced ease and carries it outside to refill. As she walks, she passes another woman, older, eyes keen despite her age. They nod in greeting. No words are exchanged. Conversation here is purposeful, efficient, weighted. She returns to the house, glancing briefly at a small niche in the wall. There, set carefully on a flat stone shelf, is a small clay token, a marker given to her when her son was admitted to the agoge. It is not personalized. No name, no date. Just a shape she knows by touch. A reminder. She does not weep. In Sparta, to weep for a child is not shameful, but it is private. Stoicism is not performed. It is lived. If her son thrives, she will hear of it through whispers. If he fails, she may not hear at all. Still, life continues. Outside, the air grows warmer. She walks to the edge of the courtyard and lifts a shallow basket of figures. The fruit is still firm. She inspects each one with care. Beside the figs lie sprigs of wild herbs, gathered at dawn, thyme, oregano, and mountain mint. These will flavor the midday broth. Even Spartan simplicity has its gentle touches. By mid-morning, the household is busy. A younger girl, perhaps her niece or daughter, tends to a hearth flame, coaxing it carefully with a curved iron tool. Smoke curls upward, not thick, but persistent. A second woman prepares grain. She grinds it slowly on a stone slab, her hands tracing circles that repeat endlessly. The room is filled with quiet work, not hurried, not idle. Each motion practiced. Repeated. Understood. No male voice breaks the rhythm. The men, those who remain in the city, are elsewhere. At the training grounds, the council, the communal halls. Spartan homes are maintained by women, supported by helot laborers, and guided by memory. And always, the boys are gone. Each mother carries this absence differently. Some wear it like a veil, silent, solemn, hidden behind daily tasks. Others let it stiffen their posture. Strength is praised here, and not just physical, but emotional. To weep for a son who falls in training is one thing, but to dishonor him by begging for mercy, by interfering with his path, that is something else entirely. There is a saying, whispered among women when word reaches them of a son's courage in battle. He was mine. No embellishment. No performance. Just 3 words. And if the son fails to meet the standard, if he flees, or falters, or shows weakness, another phrase is spoken instead. He was not mine. These words are not cruel. They are not meant to wound. They are reflections of a deeper truth, that in Sparta, the child belongs to the state, and the parent is judged not by love alone, but by what that love produces. Still, in the quiet of the night, when the hearth grows low and the wind rattles the olive branches, memories drift into the room like smoke. A wooden toy left behind. A scuffed tunic folded into a chest. A laugh, rare, bright, echoing from long ago. She lets the thought linger for a moment. Then she rises, shakes out her apron, and prepares for evening. Dinner is modest. Barley, figs, olives, and a piece of dried fish. There is no ceremony. Food is eaten as fuel. The talk is low and purposeful. No debate, no complaint. Just the smooth rhythm of life lived within firm, unyielding bounds. Later, as the stars appear, first one, then another, she steps outside. The night is cool. A light breeze carries the scent of earth and distant smoke. She stands still, arms folded, looking toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those hills, her son is training. Running. Wrestling. Watching. She does not imagine his face. That is not the way of Sparta. Instead, she imagines his silence. His strength. His posture. The way he does not flinch when corrected. The way he does not whimper when bruised. The way he stands at attention, as his father once did, and his father before him. In Sparta, childhood is not remembered. It is forged. Burnished. Sharpened. And even as the house returns to stillness, and the embers glow faintly in the hearth, she knows. The boy is gone. But the man is being made. And that is the rhythm of this place. Now, as we gently step away from the threshold of her quiet home, let us begin a new walk, one that stretches outward across the fields, into the shadows of Sparta's broader society. In the next segment, we will look more closely at those who stood just outside this rigid world, the helots, the perioikoi, and the many lives that orbited the agoge from afar. As we settle once more into the rhythm of Spartan life, let your mind slowly drift back to that quiet, windswept training ground. Sunlight dappling over the packed earth courtyard, distant footsteps echoing under stone colonnades. You're still that young Spartan boy, lean from training, your hands calloused, your eyes sharp despite your age. But now, it is not just your body being tested, it is your cunning, your resourcefulness, and your ability to survive under pressure. The agoge was not simply a training regime. It was a system of conditioning that reached into every aspect of a boy's life, including, most dramatically, his relationship with hunger. At around the age of 12, the Spartan boy's rations are deliberately cut short. Not eliminated, but limited, carefully restricted so that he remains always a little hungry. Not enough food to starve, but not enough to ever feel full. The rationale was clear: a hungry boy would learn to be inventive. He would learn to take what he needed, and, crucially, he would learn to do so without being caught. This was not a lapse in discipline. It was the discipline. Imagine yourself walking with deliberate calm past the mess hall, the scent of barley bread and roast meat drifting from the open-air kitchens. Your stomach growls quietly, but your expression remains neutral. Inside the kitchens, adult cooks and overseers prepare the food with mechanical precision. No one offers you extra portions, and no one will ask if you are hungry. Hunger is expected. Hunger is required. And so, under the shadow of night or in the chaotic moments after training, boys begin to steal. Not as an act of rebellion, but as a test of skill. The trick is not just to take, it's to not get caught. Success in theft is praised. Failure brings punishment. Not for stealing, but for being sloppy. There are tales, shared in whispers, of boys who crafted tools from scrap bronze, slipping into storerooms and lifting chunks of cheese, fruits, or even preserved meat. Others would distract cooks or guards while their companions darted in for a quick grab. There was always risk. But the greater the risk, the sharper the boy had to become. If you were caught, the punishment was severe but never cruel for its own sake. You might be beaten, yes, or denied rations altogether for a day. But the overseers never screamed. The discipline remained quiet, methodical. You were being taught not merely not to steal, but to be smart about it. To act with care. To master yourself under pressure. Some boys went further, slipping into the farms outside Sparta's walls, seeking eggs, a turnip, a loaf of bread left by a distracted helot. These excursions were especially dangerous. The moment you stepped beyond the training ground, you entered the broader world. The helots, the agricultural serfs who worked the land, might catch you and fight back. Fellow Spartans might see you and report you. But some boys returned with treasures. A honeycomb, perhaps. Or a skinned rabbit. These triumphs were shared, discreetly, among friends. Even among Spartan boys. Bound by common suffering and discipline, alliances formed. You would likely have a small circle of peers, not quite friends in the modern sense, but companions. You train together, compete together, endure together. And sometimes, when fortune smiles on your stealth, you eat together. This carefully cultivated hunger did more than teach survival. It instilled vigilance. A Spartan boy could never afford to become too comfortable, too complacent. Every lesson was a reminder that life itself could be taken away with the smallest lapse in awareness. You must always remain alert, even while resting. Even while smiling. Even while sleeping. And so it went, day after day. A rhythm of emptiness and quiet victories. Each stolen bite was a lesson not just in cunning but in consequence. You learn to weigh risk like a tactician. To plan like a hunter. And to mask your ambition under a stoic expression. But perhaps the most intense ordeal came during the famed ritual known simply as the contest. Each year, near the temple of Artemis Orthia, the older boys, those around 16, would be brought to participate in a test of pain endurance. The temple, shaded by towering trees and carved from worn stone, was not just a religious site. It was an arena. Spectators would gather in hushed rows, and priests would oversee the ceremony. A block of cheese, simple, ordinary, and symbolic, was placed upon the altar. The boy's task? To take it. But between him and the cheese stood older boys with whips, stationed there with the purpose of guarding the prize. The contestant would step forward, then dash toward the altar while enduring strike after strike. The crowd watched in silence. The priests never intervened. Some boys reached the cheese. Others collapsed before they could. It was not shameful to fall unless you screamed. To cry out, to show pain, was to fail. This was Sparta's most dramatic way of blending hunger with honor. It was not the cheese that mattered, it was the stoicism. The strength not just to steal, but to suffer in silence. And you, still growing into your limbs and sense of self, would know that such a ritual awaited you. Perhaps in months, perhaps in years. It would be the ultimate test of everything the agoge had taught, how to endure, how to think tactically, and how to survive a life that offered no softness. But not all lessons came with bruises. There were quieter challenges. You might be assigned to spy on conversations among helots or older boys. You might be asked to observe a patrol, unseen and unheard. Or to memorize a long poem. Sparta valued memory deeply, so that you could recite it during inspection. Even your sleep was part of the training. Spartan boys slept on reeds they cut themselves from the banks of the Eurotas River. In the summer, the reeds were dry and scratchy. In the winter, they were cold and stiff. There were no blankets. No pillows. Just the hard ground and the quiet hiss of the night wind. This hardness was by design. Comfort bred weakness, according to Spartan philosophy. The cold taught you how to generate warmth from within. The discomfort trained your body to ignore it. The hunger made you resourceful. Every deprivation was an invitation to grow stronger, not in flesh, but in character. And still, amid all this hardness, there were rare moments of connection. A brief glance from an elder suggesting approval. A whispered joke among boys while out gathering reeds. A stolen apple shared in the shadows. These moments, fleeting and small, carried great weight. They were reminders that even within Sparta's iron mold, humanity still glowed, dimly, but persistently. You were not merely being trained to fight. You were being trained to endure, to plan, to observe. The agoge was a crucible, not just of warriors, but of survivors. And as the stars twinkled overhead, scattered like quiet embers across the night sky, you would lie on your mat of reeds. Hungry, yes. Sore, likely. But still, you were proud. Not of what you had done, but of what you had endured without a word. You had stolen, and you had not been caught. You had suffered, and you had not cried. You had survived another day in the agoge. And tomorrow, the test would begin again. Now, settle in again as we shift the focus to a quieter, colder scene. The warmth of summer has faded, and the wind has taken on a sharper edge. In the Spartan countryside, among the mountains and scattered forests, a biting winter chill creeps through the air. This is not a landscape blanketed by snow like in northern climates, but rather one where the cold bites at bare skin and the nights grow long and unforgiving. Imagine yourself as one of the boys in the agoge, just a few months into your first year. The novelty of this new life has worn away. The discipline, the drills, and the constant struggle to keep pace with your older peers have taken their toll. And now, the seasons have changed. There are no winter uniforms. Spartan boys wore a single cloak year-round, regardless of the weather. There were no shoes. No additional bedding. The Spartans believed that hardship built strength, that exposure to the elements cultivated toughness. As the temperatures dipped and the winds howled through the cracks in the communal barracks, the boys learned to sleep huddled together for warmth. There were no fires allowed at night. That would be comfort, and comfort, in Sparta, was the enemy of greatness. Food became even more scarce in winter. While the basic meals remained meager, often little more than coarse barley porridge and black broth made from boiled meat and blood, the cold made every hunger pang sharper, more pronounced. Some boys would steal food from storage areas or from unsuspecting vendors in the agora, not out of greed, but out of necessity. And again, the theft itself was not punished, but getting caught was a sign that a boy lacked cunning and discipline. Cold mornings began with silence and frost. The ground was often hard and unwelcoming underfoot, especially for boys who had never known the sensation of warm boots or woolen socks. Training exercises did not cease with the weather. Instead, the boys were expected to show that they were unaffected, that the sting of wind on their skin or the ache in their fingers meant nothing to them. Endurance was not a virtue in Sparta. It was a requirement. Among the daily rituals was a chilling practice. Each morning, a boy might be sent to plunge into a cold stream to wash. The icy water would cut through him like glass, but he would not be allowed to flinch. If he did, he might be reprimanded, perhaps not by an instructor, but by his peers, whose scorn could often sting more than the cold itself. The winter was also a time when illness would quietly creep into the barracks. There was no medical care for the boys, no physicians assigned to their dormitories. If a boy developed a cough, a fever, or even something worse, he was expected to heal, or not. Spartan society viewed this as part of nature's sorting process. Only the strong survived. But there were quieter struggles, too. Aches and soreness, a tooth that hurt for weeks, a wound that didn't heal cleanly. These things were suffered in silence. Boys who complained were viewed with disdain. Even grief and fear had no place in the agoge. When a young recruit lost a friend, perhaps to illness or punishment, there was no ceremony, no mourning. He was expected to continue as before. Yet, amidst the hardship, something subtle began to grow. A kind of grim camaraderie among the boys. They shared their rations, discreetly, of course, lent each other warmth at night, covered for one another when someone was caught stealing or needed rest. These bonds, though never openly acknowledged, became the foundation of Spartan unity. They were not sentimental, but they were strong. Some nights, when the sky was clear and the stars sharp above the frosty plains, a boy might lie awake, curled under his rough cloak, thinking of home. He might remember the smell of bread baking, the sound of his mother's voice, or the rough embrace of his father. But he would not cry. Tears were not welcome in the agoge. Not even in the dark. Instead, he would turn over, pull his cloak tighter, and press his shoulder against the boy beside him, silent strength in a world that asked for nothing else. And so the winter passed, not marked by festivals or comforts, but by small acts of endurance. Every day survived was a victory. Every night endured was a lesson. These boys were being forged, slowly, quietly, into the men that Sparta demanded. Now, as the chill lingers in the air, we'll gently continue onward, turning next to how these Spartan boys learned not only to endure, but to fight. Their training would soon grow more intense, more demanding, and more dangerous. Let's explore how the boys of Sparta began the next phase of their transformation, the art of combat. Let the warmth of your blanket surround you as we enter another chapter in the lives of the Spartan boys. The frost of winter may still linger on the wind, but in the agoge, the seasons do not alter the rhythm of discipline. And as each boy grows taller and tougher, so too does the weight of his daily responsibilities. By now, the recruits are no longer strangers to hardship. Their bodies, once soft and awkward, are leaner, arms more defined, legs hardened by running across rugged terrain. Their minds, once filled with homesickness and fear, are sharper. They have grown used to hunger, cold, pain, and exhaustion. And yet, their real training has only just begun. This stage is all about combat. Fighting, in the Spartan world, was not simply a skill. It was an identity. The purpose of the agoge was to create soldiers, true warriors, who could move as one unit, endure the harshest of conditions, and fight without fear. Every boy knew that his future lay on the battlefield. To become a man in Sparta was to become a hoplite, a heavily armed infantry soldier who would fight in the phalanx formation, shoulder to shoulder with his brothers. Training began with wrestling, not as a game, but as a lesson in body control and aggression. The boys would grapple in pairs, their feet kicking up dust as they struggled to unbalance each other. The goal was not just to win, but to do so efficiently, with precision, with discipline. An uncontrolled victory could be seen as dangerous, a sign of lack of restraint. Next came armed sparring, using wooden swords and shields. These mock weapons were heavier than the real thing, designed to strengthen the arms and teach endurance. The boys would train in pairs, under the watchful eyes of older instructors, men who had fought in real battles, who knew the cost of hesitation or overconfidence. The Spartan phalanx was more than just a battlefield tactic, it was a symbol of collective unity. Each hoplite's shield protected not just himself, but the man to his left. And so the boys were taught not just to strike, but to stand firm, to move together, to hold the line. Any sign of individualism was corrected immediately. In Sparta, there was no room for heroes who acted alone. The group came first. Punishments for mistakes were swift. A misplaced step, a dropped shield, a sign of weakness, these could mean extra drills, lashes from a whip, or worse, public humiliation. But such punishments were not about cruelty. They were reminders that mistakes on the battlefield could cost the lives of one's comrades. By their early teens, the boys had also begun carrying real knives. While these were tools for survival as much as for fighting, they also served another purpose: preparation for the final tests to come, those that involved stealth, courage, and danger. One of the most feared exercises was the crypteia, a kind of secret rite of passage. Though not every boy would be chosen, those who were would disappear into the night with nothing but a knife and their cloak. Their mission, to survive in the wild, avoid detection, and sometimes, to kill. The precise details of the crypteia remain a mystery, wrapped in the secrecy of Spartan law. But what is clear is that this ritual was a test of everything the agoge had taught: discipline, silence, cunning, and the ruthless efficiency of a warrior. Outside the agoge, Spartan girls watched their brothers and cousins train with quiet respect. They were not idle themselves, trained in physical fitness, song, and dance. They would one day become the mothers of warriors. But it was the boys who bore the burden of the spear and the shield, whose lives were shaped entirely around one purpose: to fight and, if needed, to die for Sparta. Despite the brutality of their training, there were moments of camaraderie. The boys began to understand that their peers were not just classmates. They were future brothers in arms. Every injury tended to in silence, every meal shared, every drill completed side by side wove an invisible thread between them. As dusk fell each day, the boys would return to their communal quarters, their bodies aching from exertion. They would lie quietly in the dark, the smell of sweat and dust thick in the air, and drift off to sleep with dreams not of childhood or home, but of shields and glinting bronze, of marching feet and distant battlefields. And so, slowly, the boys became warriors. Not through glory or grand speeches, but through repetition, discipline, and pain. As we continue on, our next step will take us into the deeper rituals of Spartan life, where death, honor, and duty interwove to create a code unlike any other in the ancient world. We'll see how the young men were tested not just in body, but in loyalty. Rest easy now, and let us carry you forward into the sacred heart of the Spartan soul. The torchlight flickers gently in the darkness of ancient Sparta as we return once more to the boys of the agoge, now edging ever closer to manhood. Their limbs are strong, their hearts hardened, and their eyes hold the glint of endurance. Yet, beyond strength and discipline, there is something deeper that binds them to the Spartan way, something intangible and eternal. It is loyalty, not just to the city, but to one another. And it is in this stage of the agoge that this loyalty is tested most of all. Within the agoge, the bonds between boys were not casual. From the moment they entered at age 7, they were thrust into constant competition, but they were also raised to see each other as part of a single organism, many bodies, one purpose. And as they grew older, their companionship often took on deeper layers. These relationships, sometimes encouraged by older mentors or fostered through the trials they endured together, helped solidify a powerful unity. A fierce, unspoken brotherhood that Spartan warfare would one day rely on. Now in their late teens, the boys were increasingly immersed in the ethical and moral fabric of Sparta, a city where silence, obedience, and loyalty were prized above all. They learned what it meant to be laconic, to speak little and only when necessary. Spartans were famous throughout Greece for their sharp, minimal words, a cultural value ingrained into them from the agoge. There's an old tale, often repeated in hushed tones in the barracks, of a Spartan boy who, when accused of a crime he didn't commit, refused to defend himself. "I was taught to obey," he said simply. Right or wrong, the message was clear: loyalty to Sparta was more important than self-preservation. One of the more curious features of this phase was the Thyron, or young adult instructor. These were men in their 20s who had graduated from the agoge and now served as a kind of mentor commander over the boys. They weren't just drill masters, they were living examples of the Spartan ideal. An iron might punish or praise, but his word was law, and the boys were expected to obey him without question. But loyalty was tested not just with discipline, it was also challenged by hardship and secrecy. Each boy was instructed in the importance of discretion. They were taught that it was better to bite one's tongue than to speak idly. Stories abounded of boys enduring pain or suffering without making a sound, sometimes even dying before they would reveal a secret or show weakness. There is a haunting account of a boy who stole a fox to eat but, when caught by a patrol, hid the animal beneath his cloak. Rather than admit the theft, he stood silent as the fox gnawed at his belly, dying with the truth hidden, literally, inside him. These aren't simply legends, they are lessons. Tales repeated in the agoge to show that pain was never an excuse, that loyalty to Sparta and its laws came before all things. Even life. And perhaps most striking of all was the requirement to report disloyalty or failure. If one of their fellow trainees showed weakness or violated Spartan norms, the others were expected to report it. Failure to do so was itself a punishable offense. Imagine the internal struggle of watching your closest companion falter, perhaps stealing food, perhaps sleeping late, and knowing that your silence would cost you dearly. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a lesson in putting the community first. In wartime, a single mistake could doom an entire phalanx. The agoge was not just about personal survival, it was about making sure every man was strong enough to be trusted with the lives of others. Outside the training grounds, Spartan society mirrored this sense of duty and loyalty. Elders, or gerontes, who sat on the governing council, had themselves once endured the agoge and knew its rigors. They looked for these qualities: discipline, loyalty, silence, as signs of true leadership. The Spartan system didn't leave much room for personal dreams or ambitions. The highest aspiration was not wealth or fame, it was honor, earned through service and sacrifice. Boys who completed the agoge successfully didn't become citizens just by surviving. They became peers, equals among warriors, sworn to defend their city and obey its laws. As we continue into the next segment, we will follow these young men as they graduate from the agoge and enter the final proving grounds of Spartan society. They will become full-fledged warriors, facing not only enemies on the battlefield but the constant expectations of perfection at home. But for now, allow yourself to rest. Let the values of loyalty, silence, and brotherhood drift through your thoughts like the cool winds of the Eurotas River. The Spartan path is far from over, but our journey is unfolding gently, one heartbeat, one story, one solemn step at a time. As our dreamlike journey continues through the veiled corners of Spartan history, we now reach one of its most enigmatic and unsettling chapters, the Crypteia. Whispered about more than written, the Crypteia was not a formal military unit, nor was it simply a rite of passage. It was a shadow institution, a hidden thread within the tapestry of Sparta's social control and military indoctrination. The boys of the agoge, now matured into hardened young men in their late teens or early 20s, were not simply handed swords and shields and sent into battle. First, they had to prove themselves in a far more silent and sinister way. Only the most promising were selected for this mysterious mission, chosen not through rank or request, but through quiet observation by Spartan elders and Irenes. Once selected, the young man was told little. His mission was stark, stripped of glory or public praise. Under cover of darkness, he would vanish from the community, traveling alone, without fire or light, armed only with a dagger and his will. He became a ghost, living off the land, silent in his passage. The Crypteia was not simply a test of survival or stealth. It served a darker function, one tied to the unique structure of Spartan society. Sparta's economy and food supply were reliant on the labor of the helots, an enslaved population originally from conquered territories like Messenia. These helots vastly outnumbered the Spartan citizens, and though they tilled the land and filled Spartan bellies, they were seen as a constant threat, an ever-simmering rebellion waiting to boil over. And so the Crypteia had two intertwined purposes. The first, to instill total fear in the helot population. The second, to test the moral fiber and resilience of future Spartan leaders. The young men of the Crypteia were expected to eliminate any helot deemed a potential threat. There was no open warfare, no battle cries or heralds. This was state-sanctioned assassination, quiet and brutal. A helot showing signs of leadership, confidence, or influence might be marked. A man seen working too well, thinking too independently, or speaking too boldly could be considered dangerous. In the dead of night, he might simply vanish, silenced by one of the silent wolves prowling in the darkness. There are chilling stories of Crypteia members lurking in the fields, watching the helots work by day, and striking at night. Of helot families living in a constant state of dread, not knowing who among them might disappear next. Of young Spartans wrestling with the psychological weight of their mission, torn between obedience and something deeper, quieter, doubt. And yet, for all its cruelty, the Crypteia was not a descent into lawless violence. It was tightly controlled, ritualized, and reserved for only a select few. Participants were not celebrated upon their return. There were no medals, no tales sung in the mess halls. In fact, they were forbidden from speaking of their deeds. The true reward was acceptance into the uppermost ranks of Spartan society, an honor bestowed only upon those who had shown absolute loyalty to the Spartan ideal, no matter how terrible the path. To outsiders, the Crypteia was horrifying. To Spartans, it was a necessary tool in maintaining their fragile dominance over the helots and in forging unbreakable warriors who would never hesitate in the face of hard decisions. It is perhaps one of the clearest examples of how deeply Sparta's obsession with control, discipline, and power ran. Even its most revered warriors had to prove themselves in shadows before they could stand in the light. And yet, there is still so much about the Crypteia that remains unknown. No detailed Spartan records survive. Everything we know comes from outsiders. Greek writers like Plato and Plutarch, who viewed the institution with a mix of horror and awe. Some historians today debate whether the Crypteia was truly a blood rite or more of an extended survival test. But regardless of the exact truth, one fact remains: it was emblematic of a city that viewed hardship not as a burden, but as a crucible for greatness. As our story slips into the quiet hours of the night, let this segment linger in your thoughts. The silent footsteps of a lone Spartan wandering under starlight, the hush of olive groves in the dark, the soft crunch of leaves beneath sandal-clad feet. The line between civilization and savagery, between order and oppression, was often thinner than it seemed in ancient Sparta. Let your breathing slow now. Let the whispers of ancient oaths and silent vows carry you further into rest. In the next segment, we will walk beside the warriors as they rise fully into manhood. No longer trainees or hidden blades, but proud citizens ready to join the phalanx and serve Sparta until death. As the sun begins to rise behind the peaks of Mount Aegitus, casting long shadows across the Eurotas Valley, we arrive at one of the most iconic images of Spartan power, the phalanx. It is more than a military formation. It is a symbol of unyielding unity, absolute discipline, and the culmination of a Spartan's lifelong preparation. Here, the young men of the agoge, hardened by years of deprivation, training, and even the shadows of the crypteia, step into their roles not just as warriors, but as the iron heart of Sparta's defense. To understand Sparta, one must understand the phalanx. The phalanx was a dense block of warriors, each man carrying a large round shield known as the aspis and a long spear called a daru. The formation was designed for close-quarters combat, a wall of bronze and muscle that moved as one, breathed as one, and struck as one. To break a Spartan phalanx was nearly impossible, not because of superior weaponry or tactics alone, but because of the unwavering cohesion between its members. In the phalanx, a man did not fight for glory. He fought for the man to his left. This brotherhood, this unbreakable trust, was forged in the agoge and refined in the syssitia, the communal mess halls where Spartan men ate, discussed, and bonded throughout their lives. A Spartan warrior spent more time with his mess group than with his own family. Bonds were not just emotional, they were tactical. You had to trust that the shield beside you would hold firm, that your comrade would not flee, that your line would not falter. In battle, the shield was not meant to protect the bearer, but the man beside him. And so, from a very young age, Spartans were trained to think collectively. Individual ambition was not merely discouraged, it was dangerous. Even the famed Spartan helmet, with its sweeping crest and limited vision, encouraged forward movement and narrow focus. There was no room for distraction. No room for retreat. Retreat was not an option in Sparta. It was better to die in formation than to survive in disgrace. The most shameful fate a Spartan could face was not death in battle, but losing one's shield, signaling abandonment of the phalanx. The famous Spartan saying, "Come back with your shield, or on it," was not poetic flourish. It was a commandment. A shield could be dropped in flight. A body carried back upon it was proof of honor unto death. Yet within the phalanx's rigidity, there was art. Timing. Grace. A slow, deliberate rhythm like that of a war drum. Every movement was practiced endlessly in drills, turning, pressing forward, locking shields, extending spears. The sound of hundreds of boots striking in unison sent a low, thunderous tremor across the battlefield. Outside observers often remarked at how unnatural Spartan soldiers seemed, emotionless, efficient, even serene in the chaos of war. They did not shout, boast, or flinch. They advanced slowly, inexorably, as if they were a single being. Their silence could be more terrifying than a war cry. And when battle was done, if a Spartan survived, they did not bask in celebration. Victory was not about personal valor but collective achievement. There were no statues carved for individual warriors, no tales of lone heroism. Sparta celebrated discipline, not daring. The phalanx was not only a formation, it was the physical manifestation of everything Sparta stood for. Order, endurance, loyalty, strength bound by restraint. But this life came at a cost. To be a Spartan warrior was to accept a life of duty without pause. From the age of 7, you were molded. As an adult, you belonged not to your family, but to your state. You did not choose your path, it was chosen for you. Even love and personal bonds were shaped to serve Sparta's needs. And yet, within this strict and often severe framework, many Spartans found pride. To stand shield to shield with one's brothers, to defend one's homeland with absolute purpose, this gave life meaning, even in its hardships. Let your mind rest here for a moment, picturing the early morning mist rising from a field as the Spartan phalanx trains in silence. The soft metallic clatter of shields meeting, the rhythmic crunch of sand beneath sandals, the quiet grunts of warriors in motion. Let it all slow down. Let the clinking of bronze, the breath of ancient warriors, lull you deeper. Deeper into the past. Deeper into stillness. In our next segment, we will explore a lesser-known but deeply intimate part of Spartan life, the mess halls of the Syssitia, where warriors built not just muscle and strategy, but bonds that would carry them into battle, and perhaps beyond. In the fading light of a Spartan afternoon, when the rigorous drills and unyielding discipline of the agoge had given way to a measured, reflective pace, the young men of Sparta gathered in a place both functional and hallowed, the Syssitia. This was not merely a dining hall. It was a space of quiet communion, a chamber where the day's labors were set aside for a ritual of shared sustenance and wordless understanding among warriors. Let your mind wander gently into this realm, where the clamor of battle is replaced by the soft murmur of brotherhood, and every murmured syllable is tempered by mutual respect and the duty of collective memory. Imagine, if you will, a long, low-ceilinged room built of rough-hewn stone, its walls retaining the natural coolness of the earth even as the day's heat ebbed away. Flickering oil lamps cast trembling shadows upon the faces of those present. Faces that have known the discipline of endless drills, the bitter taste of hunger, the subtle victories of undetected theft, and the solemnity of endless training. In this space, the Spartan warriors, now standing on the threshold of full citizenship, sat in equal measure, their simple garments and modest adornment speaking volumes of the austere values they carried. The Syssitia was not a place of excess or indulgence. There was no extravagant feast here, no lavish display of wealth or abundance. Instead, the table was adorned with modest fare, bowls of thick barley porridge, served with a slight drizzle of olive oil that glistened softly in the lamplight, small portions of salted pork, its flavor robust yet unadorned, simple fare of figs, olives, and the occasional crust of barley bread, a token reminder of both necessity and the Spartan repudiation of luxury. Stewing in a clay pot, the broth was dark and robust. A mixture of boiled meat and water that sustained more than just the body, but the communal spirit. In the gentle hush that fell over the gathering, each man partook in the meal with a measured deliberateness, a routine that was as much about physical nourishment as it was about strengthening the ties that bound them. They were not given overt instructions to speak or to share. Conversation arose naturally, in hushed, measured tones that respected both tradition and individual reserve. Here, the clamor of competition was suspended, replaced by an attentiveness to the subtle cues of camaraderie. One might hear, barely above the soft clink of ceramic against stone, murmurs discussing the day's training, memories of silent corrections in the barracks, or simply the shared observation of the quiet flame dancing in the oil lamp. Every gesture, every passing of a dish, was executed with a dignity that spoke to a collective understanding. For in Sparta, personal identity was intricately woven into the fabric of the communal group. The meal was a time when hierarchies softened, the rigid discipline of the agoge found its gentler side, allowing the men to glimpse, if only briefly, the warmth of a humanity otherwise overshadowed by ritual and duty. You may picture two young warriors, their scars and sinewy muscles a testament to years of relentless training, leaning toward each other to exchange a few words about an amusing mishap on the training field, a stolen piece of apple, perhaps, or the soft laughter that followed an inadvertent stumble. There is a natural humor, subtle and understated, the kind that arises only when men who have seen little time for frivolity finally allow themselves a moment of shared amusement. Yet, underlying this scene of modest sustenance is the weight of shared responsibility. The syssitia was not merely a meal, it was a daily reaffirmation of what it meant to belong to Sparta. In the disciplined quiet of this ritual dining, each man was bound by unspoken oaths, to uphold a tradition, to honor the collective over the individual, to remember that the strength of the phalanx depended as much on the bonds of friendship as on the discipline of arms. As the conversation unfolded slowly, one could discern a rhythm akin to that of a soft chant, a cadence of words that wove through the room like an ancient lullaby. Occasionally, an elder or a man who had long passed through the fierceness of active training would offer a brief reflection, a proverb perhaps, that encapsulated the essence of Spartan stoicism, something as simple as "a man is measured not by what he takes, but by what he leaves behind." There was no boastfulness in the air, only the quiet assurance of men who had been tested repeatedly by time and trial. Their voices, though soft, carried the resonance of countless shared hardships. The very atmosphere of the syssitia invited introspection. Outside, the harsh brightness of the training grounds had given way to the gentle twilight. Inside, the gathering was a mirror to the soul of Sparta, a reminder that even in a society famed for its martial austerity, there existed a space for subtle, deeply felt bonds. In this communal ritual, meals were punctuated by long periods of silence. Not silence as in loneliness, but silence as an active act of mutual respect, the kind that allowed each man to reflect upon his own journey, the cold winter days spent shivering in unyielding barracks, the challenging hours of combat practice on the dusty field, and the secret sorrows and triumphs remembered only in the recesses of a hardened heart. This quiet introspection was a form of communion, a shared solace that no solitary meal could offer. It was as if the act of sitting together, side by side, became a living testament to the Spartan creed that bound them all. A creed that prized resilience, self-control, and the unbreakable spirit of unity. One might imagine, as the meal progressed, the interplay of light and shadow upon the weathered faces of these men. Their eyes, reflecting both the discipline learned through years of hardship and the soft glimmer of hope for a future defined by honor, locked occasionally in mutual acknowledgement. There was an almost ritualistic exchange in the subtle tilt of a head or the slight nod of appreciation when an elder recalled a long-forgotten proverb. In that moment, the individual struggles and silent losses that each had endured in the relentless demands of the agoge were acknowledged, albeit without overt emotion. In the latter part of the meal, as the oil lamps burned lower and the cool night crept silently over the horizon, a sense of unity deepened. The communal table, though unadorned, served as the stage for an enduring legacy. A legacy where each Spartan was not solely defined by the discipline of his youth but by the quiet, unwavering commitment to his brothers in arms. Even as morsels of food were carefully savored and the last of the broth ladled into low, earthen cups, the syssitia lingered as an enduring symbol of what it meant to be Spartan, not simply a warrior, but a man of measured restraint, whose strength was magnified through the bonds he formed with those who sat shoulder to shoulder with him. As the final words of the meal faded into the gentle murmur of the cooling night, the men rose, one by one, leaving behind the soft echoes of whispered farewells and promises to return at the next meal. Their paths led back to the simple stone corridors of their communal lodgings, a temporary respite before the next day's trials beckoned. In that quiet retreat, the echo of the syssitia remained. A reminder that in the midst of ceaseless discipline, there was space for reflection, for shared history, and for the eternal striving toward a common, silent ideal. Let your thoughts settle on the image of that long, steadfast table, the soft glow of oil lamps, and the measured, unhurried conversation of men who found solace not in grand celebration but in the unwavering support of brotherhood. And now, as you allow this gentle memory to weave its way into the night, prepare to follow our journey into the deeper, more solitary phases of Spartan life, a phase where the responsibilities of war and the burdens of honor weigh heavily upon the soul of a man. Imagine a flickering torchlight dancing against the stone walls of a temple at dawn, the air dense with the mingling scents of olive oil, beeswax, and incense. The Spartan boy, tired from days of training but alert with reverence, stands among his peers in silence. His hands are clasped, his body still, as the priests chant hymns to Apollo, to Artemis or Thea, and to the gods who rule over discipline and war. Religion, for the Spartans, was not an escape from their daily rigors, it was an extension of them. For these boys, religious rituals were not occasional formalities. They were part of the rhythm of life, woven deeply into every season, every trial, and every transition. The gods were not distant myths, they were living presences, invoked constantly in prayer, in sacrifice, and in community. Each rite, each offering, reminded the young of their place in a grand and ordered cosmos, a cosmos that demanded obedience, purity, and strength. The shrine of Artemis or Thea was one of the most sacred and significant for Spartan youth. Nestled near the Eurotas River, it was the site of one of the most severe rites of passage for boys in training, the ritual of endurance. During this notorious rite, boys would undergo a test of physical pain. Not as punishment, but as a sacred competition. Standing before the altar, bare-backed and braced, they were whipped by older youths as crowds looked on. Their task was not merely to endure, but to do so without a sound. To show weakness was to dishonor not just oneself, but the goddess, the polis, and the lineage of Sparta. This ritual, known as the diamastigosis, may seem brutal through a modern lens, and indeed, in many ways it was. But to the Spartans, it was considered holy. The pain was a bridge, a communion with divinity through the body's fortitude. Boys who bore the lashes well were honored. Those who cried out risked shame, not cruelty, they were seen as falling short of the sacred ideal of restraint. Even here, in the context of worship, the agoge principles held fast, pain was a teacher, and suffering was a path to clarity. The gods, in the Spartan worldview, did not demand wealth or elaborate temples. They demanded virtue, arat. The pursuit of excellence in body, mind, and spirit. This meant that even religious festivals, while festive in spirit, were never frivolous. They were tightly bound to civic duty and military readiness. One of the most cherished of these was the festival of the Gymnopaedia. Each summer, under the scorching sun, young Spartans would gather in the central agora and perform dances, martial in nature, composed of precise, disciplined movements. Their bodies were bare, oiled, and shining with sweat. But this was not vanity. It was a tribute to balance, to unity, to the harmony of form and function. Through these public rituals, the boy did not just learn how to fight, he learned how to embody grace under pressure, to display poise in the face of strain. Other religious practices focused on remembrance and connection. Ancestor veneration was deeply rooted in Spartan life. Boys were taught to honor their lineage, to know the names and glories of their forebears. Before battle, warriors would invoke the shades of their ancestors, calling on them for strength. For the young, this meant growing up with the constant awareness that they were never alone. Behind every decision, every test, stood the silent gaze of generations past. The divine was not only found in suffering or in glory, it was found in silence too. Before sunrise drills, boys often gathered in collective stillness, heads bowed, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant splash of river water. Teachers might recite ancient sayings or poems by Tertius, the Spartan poet whose words stirred courage and loyalty. In these quiet moments, boys were encouraged to reflect not just on their duties, but on the meaning behind them. Even in a culture defined by action, there was space for contemplation, though never too much. There were also subtle ways in which religious practice reminded boys of their connection to the land. Offerings of fruit, olive branches, or fresh spring water served as small, daily acts of gratitude. The divine lived not just in the heavens but in the mountains that loomed beyond the city, in the rivers that nourished the fields, and in the animals that shared their world. To disrespect nature was to disrespect the gods. Spartan boys learned early that humility was not weakness, it was wisdom. The transitions of life, from childhood to youth, from youth to warrior, were all marked by ritual. The agoge itself was framed as a sacred journey, with every phase punctuated by tests that carried spiritual as well as civic meaning. Even the sisisha, the shared meals that bonded men together, often began with prayer and ended with offerings. Eating together was not just about food, it was communion, a sacred solidarity. One of the more quiet yet meaningful rituals took place in the home, or what little of it boys experienced. Before leaving at age 7, a boy might be taken by his mother to the household shrine. There, she would place a hand on his head, invoke the blessings of the gods, and whisper ancestral stories into his ear. It was a rare, tender act in a society that prized stoicism. But it, too, was deeply Spartan, a reminder that duty was born not just of law, but of love. In the eyes of the polis, religious obedience reinforced civic virtue. It was not enough to be strong, you had to be pious. Not enough to be brave, you had to be reverent. The gods were not indulgent protectors, but watchful guardians. They blessed the disciplined and humbled the arrogant. This awareness shaped how a boy carried himself, how he spoke, how he thought. As dusk fell over Sparta, the sound of hymns might drift through the olive groves, sung by girls in white robes honoring Athena or Apollo. The boys, from their barracks or training fields, would hear these songs as faint echoes. Reminders that beauty still existed alongside brutality. That the gods, while demanding, were also present. Watching. Guiding. Waiting. In the world of the Spartan boy, religion was not escape from hardship, it was a guiding light through it. As the shadows shift gently across the mountains of Laconia and the warm Peloponnesian wind stirs the olive trees, imagine yourself amidst the quiet rhythms of a Spartan festival. In a society so often remembered for war, discipline, and restraint, it might come as a surprise to learn that the Spartans celebrated the year through a rich cycle of religious festivals, civic gatherings, and collective ritual. These moments, scattered like precious stones across the Spartan calendar, were essential not only to worship but to reinforcing the unity and values of the community. Let us begin with the Carneia, perhaps the most quintessentially Spartan of all the festivals. Held each summer in honor of Apollo Carneos, this 9-day celebration was deeply sacred and marked by processions, sacrifices, and a curious ritual known as the dromina, a ceremonial chase. During this rite, a chosen youth wearing garlands would run while other young men pursued him. If they caught him, the harvest would be good, if not, it was taken as an ominous sign. But this symbolic pursuit was more than superstition, it was an echo of Spartan ideals, athleticism, discipline, and the inescapable link between order and divine favor. The Carneia was so sacred that even war bowed before it. In 490 BCE, when Persian forces landed at Marathon, the Spartans delayed sending troops, not out of cowardice or indecision, but because they could not march until the Carneia concluded. This incident, often remarked upon by ancient historians, offers a quiet but profound insight into Spartan priorities. Even the urgency of battle yielded to the rhythms of the gods. Other festivals, too, shaped the spiritual and civic landscape of Sparta. The Hyacinthia, honoring the beautiful youth Hyacinthos and the god Apollo, blended sorrow and celebration. The first day was devoted to mourning. Honoring Hyacinthos, who, according to myth, died in a tragic accident caused by Apollo's jealousy or misfortune. The samba tone was followed by a joyful day of feasting, dancing, and music, celebrating Hyacinthos' rebirth or spiritual ascent. It is during this festival that even Spartan severity softened, and song filled the air. Imagine standing on the sacred grounds outside the sanctuary of Amyclae, where boys, young men, and elders gathered not only to pay homage but to reaffirm their place in Spartan society. Musical contests, choral dances, and communal meals unfolded under the wide sky. These were rare chances for the rigid caste boundaries to relax slightly, where the helots might serve, but also observe, and the rigid machinery of discipline paused to allow for beauty. The gymnopedia was another significant celebration. Though it may sound festive, its structure reflected the core of Spartan values. Held in the heat of summer in the agora, it featured naked dances performed by boys, young men, and older warriors. These were not merely artistic displays, they were carefully choreographed expressions of physical prowess, control, and memory. The songs sung during the gymnopedia recounted glorious deeds, both legendary and recent, reinforcing the ever-present link between past valor and present duty. To a modern observer, it might appear that even Spartan leisure was a form of training. And in many ways, it was. But there's another way to understand this, through the lens of unity and rhythm. These festivals provided the rare harmonies that bound the city-state together, not just as warriors and rulers, but as a community with shared myths, joys, and sorrows. Even meals during these festivals took on special importance. The communal syssitia, normally austere, could become more generous, with wine flowing more freely and stories shared with a lighter tone. Younger boys listened intently to the memories of their elders, catching glimpses of battles, hunts, and past festivals. In these moments, the harsh divisions of age and rank softened, not erased, but temporarily bridged by laughter, tradition, and reverence. One cannot forget the role of the divine in all these rituals. Spartan gods were not distant beings, they were present in every sacrifice, in every chant, in every movement of the ceremonial dancers. From Artemis Orthia, whose rites we've already explored, to Apollo, protector of law and order, the gods wove themselves into the very fiber of Spartan life. Participation in these festivals wasn't optional, it was a sacred duty. To skip one without cause was not simply a civic failure, but a moral lapse. And what of the girls and women? Though their visibility in these festivals was limited compared to the boys, they were not excluded. Certain rites, particularly those honoring goddesses such as Artemis or Helen, allowed girls to dance, sing, and participate in choirs. Through these, they were initiated into adult womanhood, their roles equally vital in preserving the strength of the Spartan lineage. As the sun sets and the city stills once more, the last echoes of the festival drift into the night, soft singing, the clink of empty cups, the quiet breath of satisfied fatigue. These were the rare days when the ever-present pressure of perfection eased into harmony. And so, through sacred games, mythic mourning, and the sound of music carried on warm breezes, the people of Sparta found rhythm in the pauses between drills. It is in these moments that one truly understands Sparta, not just as a citadel of warriors, but as a society deeply in tune with its gods, its history, and itself. Now, as we move gently forward in our journey, we will begin to shift our gaze toward the darker undercurrents that pulsed beneath Spartan discipline. In the next segment, we will descend into the realm of Sparta's secret police, the Crypteia, a chilling reminder that even the quietest city must guard its order through shadows and silence. As the warm air of the Peloponnesian plains begins to cool with the approach of evening, let us descend from the sacred festivals and turn our attention to something darker, something quieter, yet no less integral to the Spartan state. Beneath the polished bronze of hoplite armor and the rhythmic discipline of festivals, there moved shadows, an institution little understood and often feared, known as the Crypteia. The word itself hints at secrecy, cryptos, meaning hidden. And indeed, the Crypteia operated in secret, without the fanfare of parades or the echo of choral chants. It was a system built not for ceremony, but for control. So what was the Crypteia? Ancient sources, particularly Plato and Plutarch, give us glimpses into this mysterious institution, though never a complete picture. At its core, the Crypteia was a kind of secret police or paramilitary unit composed of elite Spartan youths, specifically those who had shown the most promise during their agoge, the grueling system of Spartan education and training. Participation in the Crypteia was not a punishment, nor a formal rank. Rather, it was an eerie rite of passage, a test not only of endurance and cunning but of the ability to embody the raw and often brutal ideals of the Spartan state. These young men, sometimes only in their late teens, were sent into the countryside with nothing but a dagger, minimal clothing, and orders to survive off the land. But their mission wasn't just about survival. Their task, unspoken, yet deeply understood, was to monitor, suppress, and sometimes eliminate the helot population. Let's pause there for a moment. The helots, as you may recall, were the enslaved agricultural laborers who far outnumbered the Spartans. Without them, the Spartan economy, and the leisure to focus on warfare and statecraft, would collapse. Yet their very existence posed a constant threat. A slave majority is always, in some sense, a ticking clock. And the Crypteia was Sparta's chilling answer to this demographic tension. Each year, as Plutarch tells us, the Spartan ephors, those 5 powerful magistrates, would declare ritual war on the helots. This was not a war of armies and battlefields, but of silence and sudden death. It allowed members of the Crypteia to kill helots without incurring religious pollution or legal consequence. In this sacred framework, murder was transfigured into a form of state-sanctioned purification, a necessary violence to preserve order. By night, the members of the Crypteia would creep through the fields and villages of Laconia. They targeted helots considered too strong, too clever, too outspoken. There was no trial, no warning, only the knife, the dark, and silence. To us, this might seem like cruelty masked by ritual. And in many ways, it was. But to the Spartans, it was something more, a deeply embedded mechanism of control. Where other Greek city-states relied on laws and soldiers, Sparta employed fear as a foundation of order. And for a society that feared disorder above all else, this made grim sense. The Crypteia was also a test. A young Spartan chosen for this service had to learn to live invisibly, to kill without hesitation, to blend into the landscape like a wild predator. He could not light fires. He could not be seen. He had to scavenge food, endure the elements, and suppress all fear. It was not enough to be brave on the battlefield. One had to prove mastery over fear, cold, hunger, and guilt. Those who survived often emerged as future leaders, shaped not only by discipline, but by blood and silence. What did this do to a person? It's impossible to know fully. But it offers a window into the kind of hardness Sparta demanded from its elite. They were not just soldiers. They were instruments of a state that prized stability above all. And sometimes, that stability required shadows. There is a strange parallel here. Just as the festivals brought the community together under the watchful eyes of the gods, the Crypteia ensured that the helots, and by extension, the entire social hierarchy, remained in place. One built order through celebration and shared myth. The other preserved it through invisible terror. And yet, the two were not so different in structure. Both were deeply ritualized. Both were considered sacred in their own way. Both were, above all, instruments of continuity. But not everyone approved. Even among the Greeks, the Crypteia was controversial. Philosophers like Aristotle criticized it, suggesting it fostered brutality more than virtue. Others, like Plato, admired its severity but acknowledged its costs. And modern historians still debate whether the Crypteia was truly as lethal and widespread as the ancient sources suggest, or whether it has been distorted by myth, fear, and propaganda. Still, whether literal or symbolic, the Crypteia remains one of the most unsettling facets of Spartan life. It reminds us that the same society that honored discipline, beauty, and song also built itself on fear, silence, and control. As the last torch burns low in a Spartan barracks and the night grows thick, it's not the singing from the temple or the clatter of shields that echoes, it's the footsteps you can't hear, the blade you don't see, the message unspoken. In our next and final segment, we will move beyond the walls of Sparta and into its legacy. What happened when this carefully calibrated society met the tides of change? When its warriors aged, its enemies evolved, and the world grew louder than Sparta's silence. The long night of Spartan power did not last forever. Even the most disciplined society, rooted in ritual, fortified by fear, and guarded by spears, is not immune to the currents of change. And so we come now, gently and slowly, to the fading years of Sparta, not with the noise of a collapsing empire, but with the quiet erosion of a world that had once seemed eternal. Sparta's decline was not sudden. There was no single disaster or catastrophe that felled it in an instant. Rather, it withered, bit by bit, under the pressures of war, politics, and time. And in that slow unraveling, we find a profound lesson, not just in history, but in human nature itself. Let us begin in the 5th century BCE, when Sparta reached the zenith of its power after the Peloponnesian War. Having defeated Athens in 404 BCE, the Spartans stood as the undisputed rulers of the Greek world. Their hoplites marched through once hostile territories. Their allies bowed to their discipline. Even distant powers watched with wary respect. But there was a problem, one that no phalanx could fix. Spartan society had always been small and rigidly closed. To be a Spartiate, a full citizen, one had to be born into it, trained through the agoge, and own land worked by helots. It was a narrow funnel, and each generation fewer passed through it. By the 4th century BCE, the number of full Spartan citizens had begun to dwindle. Some estimates suggest that by the time of the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, when Thebes dealt Sparta a crushing blow, there were fewer than 1,000 full Spartiates remaining. Thebes' victory at Leuctra marked the end of Spartan supremacy. The brilliant Theban general Epaminondas, using tactical innovations, shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. Even more devastating, he liberated Messenia, the heartland of the Helot population. Overnight, Sparta lost the agricultural engine that had sustained its warriors for centuries. The Helots were free. Imagine what that must have meant, not just economically, but emotionally, spiritually, ritually. For a society that had built its very identity on mastery and control, to lose its slaves was not just a political defeat, it was a collapse of purpose. In the centuries that followed, Sparta tried to adapt. There were half-hearted reforms, attempts to broaden citizenship, to incorporate outsiders. But these changes always ran against the current of Spartan culture, which prided itself on purity, austerity, and resistance to change. Even the most practical reforms were seen as betrayals of the Spartan ideal. Still, Sparta lingered. When Alexander the Great rose to power in the 4th century BCE, he famously bypassed Sparta entirely. The city had become a relic even then, a place admired for its history, but no longer feared. And yet, it endured. While other Greek city-states were razed, rebuilt, or absorbed into empires, Sparta remained stubbornly intact. No great palaces. No towering temples. Just the echo of an old rhythm, a flicker of its former flame. During the Roman period, Sparta enjoyed a kind of strange afterlife. The Romans, ever enamored with martial virtue, admired the Spartans deeply. They saw in them a reflection of their own ideals, discipline, sacrifice, devotion to the state. Spartan customs were revived as displays for Roman tourists. Young men would stage mock agoges. Public whippings at the altar of Artemis or Thea became blood spectacles for visiting dignitaries. The rituals that had once shaped warriors now entertained conquerors. It was, in a way, the final Spartan irony. A culture that had prided itself on silence, secrecy, and seriousness was now being performed like a play. The audience applauded. But the actors no longer believed the script. And then, slowly, the city faded. Its stones sank into the earth. Its laws were forgotten. The agoge fell silent. No more songs at the gymnopedia. No more stealthy feet slipping through the dark as part of the crypteia. Just ruins, fields, and the occasional whisper of wind through broken columns. Yet, Sparta never truly disappeared. It lived on, not in power, but in memory. Writers, thinkers, and leaders across the centuries resurrected Sparta in words, even when the city itself was dust. Machiavelli praised its simplicity. Rousseau dreamed of its purity. Hitler admired its ruthlessness. American educators admired its endurance. Military academies studied its discipline. And so, Sparta became myth. Not false, but elevated, simplified into an idea, stripped of contradiction. The complex, often brutal realities of its existence, helot slavery, child cruelty, suppression of art, were pushed aside in favor of its image, stoic, strong, unyielding. Even today, the word Spartan conjures visions of toughness, resilience, simplicity. It is used in fitness brands, military slogans, and films. It is chanted in locker rooms and whispered in political speeches. But how much of this reflects the true Sparta? That, perhaps, is the most curious part of all. Because Sparta was not a fantasy. It was a place. A society of real people, who sang, who feared, who fought, who aged. Who lived under the weight of their own laws. Who believed they were preserving something sacred. As we close our journey into the stillness of Sparta, we are left not with statues or speeches, but with quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a long march ends. The kind of silence that follows the last song of a festival. The stillness of a city that spoke not through poetry or monument, but through action, and finally, through memory. Sparta did not build empires of marble or write volumes of philosophy. It built a legacy in discipline, in myth, and in the strange human desire to remember what was hard, even when what was hard was also cruel. And so, dear listener, if you find yourself drifting into sleep, let your thoughts wander not to grand cities or golden temples, but to the quiet hills of Laconia, where the wind still moves through the olive trees, and where, if you listen closely, you might just hear the faint rhythm of sandals on stone, and a lullaby sung in Doric dialect, lost to time.